John, we're at the end of a very tense week. Been a lot of activity here in New York City, ongoing riots against the NYPD, increasing violence. How are you, John?
I'm great, and I have really good news to report tonight to everybody.
I think good news is something that everybody could get into. Where do you want to begin?
Bear with me. I got two things at the same time here.
Here in New York City, ongoing
Oh, yeah,
riots.
that's me. No
Uh-huh.
problem. Hey, these
Okay.
things happen sometimes.
That's all right. Let's shut it down. Okay.
Yeah.
Forgive me.
Okay.
All right. So we have really good news to report tonight. And I don't know, when you look at Drudge Report, if you pull Drudge up and you look at just the headlines right now, it's pretty scary stuff. Drastic measures.
Right.
18 states are in the red zone. We're deploying military medics in California and Texas.
Wow.
All this talk of the second wave and all that kind of stuff, right? And it makes everybody wonder, they're talking about, are we going to be able to send the kids back to school? I mean, I've never seen this kind of fear mongering going on. So I want to review a couple of these headlines because a couple of them are really interesting. In particular, why don't we start at the top? Why don't you go through them and I'll call out a couple of these that we may want to dig into a little quicker, and I'll
Sure.
show you some of these breaks that I've had.
Well, the first thing they've got here on the Drudge Report is that the United States is experiencing 77,217 infections in 24 hours. But I want to point out to you, John, this right here is an encoded 33. We've got 1, 2, 3 sevens and 21. 2 plus 1 is 3.
Ooh.
That is an encoded 33 trying to trick us.
or a hell of a hand in poker, one or the other.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
all right. Now here's the thing. They're talking about the number of infections, new infections, right? New cases in the last 24 hours. So the first question is that good or is that bad, that number? Is 77,000, whatever cases, new infections, is that good? Or is that bad? Is
Sounds
that
like a lot.
average? Sounds like a lot compared to what? What is your point of reference? What is your baseline? Right. So you don't really have one, but that's the top story. That's the number one thing. Okay. But you don't really have a baseline. And notice how they're talking about cases in the last week or three. We're hearing a lot about cases, and there's more cases per day, right? How many cases? New cases, 77,000 new cases. How many people are dead? How many more people are dying? So here's my hypothesis. If you told me there's 330 million people in America, if you told me each day there's 1 million more cases, but nobody's died. No one's died, but we have 1 million more cases today. I'd say that's great news. So it's all about perspective. It's all about having a frame of reference. And it's all about knowing what the hell you're looking at and not falling for the nonsense. So this article, this is from Reuters, and I've talked about Reuters before and how Reuters, the Associated Press, the New York Times have manipulated video footage when we were looking at the Las Vegas shooting case, right? We saw that footage from inside the hotel room had been edited in the same place by all these agencies.
Yeah.
So when I see a story from Reuters talking about how many new cases there are, talking about Florida, South Carolina, Texas, talking about 138,000 Americans have died, right? Now they get into the hardest hit areas right now are Texas and Arizona, and then deaths peaked in April and 2,000 a day and the current tally. And no one is really showing you the facts, although these are facts. The way they're spinning them is in a fear-mongering way. And the good news is what we're going to see tonight. And I'm going to show you guys news that's you're going to sit back in your chair and you're going to go, what? How is this not in the news? How is this not the top story on, pick who's your favorite Tucker Carlson, Sean
Crowdsource the
Hannity,
truth.
crowdsource the truth. I mean, how is this not the top story, right? So what you're going to see tonight is mind-boggling. And maybe what we should do is we should talk about what we spoke about last week. So we're talking about Texas, we're talking about Florida. In last week's patron-only show, the break that we had, I had a video that came out this week that's kind of a part 2 video that explains what that break was. So for those of you who are not patrons that are interested in joining, that the information that we were looking at late last week after this show was released in a video that I put out 1 or 2 videos ago. Part 2. Stop the Presses, Something of the Century, Part 2. And that video talks about what we talked about in our patron-only hour. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at that video, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you what we talked about last week in the patron-only hour, which is that when we went to Texas and we went to Florida and we went to California and Georgia and a whole bunch of other states, we found that more people had died of influenza this past season than from coronavirus. And in many cases, it was a factor of 2 or a factor of 3, meaning 3 times more people died from influenza than from coronavirus. So that was a sort of a stunning revelation, meaning 12,000 people have died in Texas, 11,000 have died in Florida, 18,000 have died in California, far larger numbers than the coronavirus deaths. So we covered that last week when we were in our patron-only hour. That was a pretty big break, right? No one is talking about that. Nobody really understands that there's more people dead in Texas by a factor of 3. Texas was 3 or 4. It was like 80-20. It was remarkable. It's like a factor of 4 as far as coronavirus versus influenza deaths. And in Florida, factor of 3. California, same 75-25. So that was the big break last week. The big break in this show that we're going to share in the YouTube pre-show is similarly remarkable. But before we get to that, let's step back a second, right? And let's go back to the news on Drudge Report and what you're hearing from everybody about the number of cases and how hot it is in Texas and how horrible it is in Florida, and Miami's a disaster, and they're out of morgue space in every state, and they're calling in the military. All right, one of the stories here, though, is that Fauci made a 1918 Spanish flu comparison.
Yeah.
And he did that this week at Georgetown. Right? Yeah. So he was speaking, this is like returning to the scene of the crime. This was the same location that he spoke at in 2017, right before the inauguration, where he predicted there was going to be an outbreak during this presidency.
A surprise
so
outbreak.
He's in the same, exactly. So he's returned to the scene of the crime. He's at Georgetown University. And he says that when we look back on coronavirus, when we look back on it, we will compare it to the Spanish flu.
But Mark Meadows said that was irresponsible. Why did Meadows say that? I guess he doesn't watch Crowdsource the Truth.
I guess, again, this is one of these things where do these guys consider this national security, right? As soon as they put that national security label on it, it becomes, well, now it's irresponsible to talk about it, and And I want to challenge what is considered national security. I think that a whole bunch of people who are not voted into office are deciding to keep secrets from those of us who pay taxes unnecessarily. Unnecessarily. And again, I don't need to know where the ICBMs are. I don't want to know. Those are good secrets to keep. But these other secrets that they're keeping, not okay. That's got to end. Yeah.
Look at this picture of Fauci here in style. He's relaxing in his landscaped backyard while everybody else is worrying about how much frozen fish is left in the freezer. And this guy's there with his fancy socks. Oh my God, he needs to be thrown in that pool. the good doctor.
Well,
This is terrible.
the other thing is he's turning 80, right? He's 79 years old. He's going to be 80.
I'll give him
What the
credit. He
hell is
looks
he
good
doing?
for 80.
He does, but what is he doing already? Enough. I mean, how much power must he have? He's wielding billions of dollars, right? He gets to hand out billions and say, help me make a vaccine, help us make a vaccine, help us make a vaccine. He plays kingmaker, right? And he's been playing this role for years and years and years and years. But he's not the only one, right? There's a whole bunch of other guys. This Dan Jurgensen guy, there's a whole cast of characters below Fauci that are all part of this virus machine, this operation to resurrect viruses and to patent certain spike proteins and then to develop certain vaccines to control the viruses that they engineered in the first place. I mean, this whole thing is a mess. And I mean, we could probably spend a year investigating just Fort Detrick, right? And just the messes that have gone on at Fort Detrick. I mean, that alone could probably keep us busy for a year. So when you start to put all this together and you start to add in Winnipeg and Wuhan, and did you see the photographs where we had some of these guys were in the Wuhan lab a couple years ago, like in 2015?
He's hanging out with Obama checking the iMac.
Yeah. In the lab.
We got kind of a rough
this is kind of remarkable
connection today, John. Sorry, it's remarkable.
I believe. So again, the news in general, very negative, a lot of fear mongering, curfew in South Beach, body bags, mortuary trucks. I mean, scary stuff. Still with me?
Yeah, I'm trying to play with your lip sync here. Keep going.
Okay. So let's scroll down a little bit in the Drudge Report page and let's see what other stories they've got here about the virus. The virus prompts drastic measures. Military medics are being sent. Who called for the military medics? Whose idea was that? Was that Dr. Fauci? Was that the Surgeon General? Was that the President of the United States? Who called for the military medics? And where are they going? What happened to the field hospitals? Where are the military medics going since they put all the field hospitals away? Now they need mortuary trucks. Again, we had the field hospital set up and we put them away. And now we need all this stuff. So
how come when I hit military medics, it's talking about millions of kids told fall return to school is unlikely?
Interesting. So there's something wrong with the link. Interesting. Something's wrong with the link.
It's a valid point, though, that, this is, if you're 5, 6, 7, you're a little kid going to school, and now you're not having first grade, you're not having second grade, you're staying home. This is having major effects on the, emotional and psychological development of young children.
Yeah, how about if you're 46 years old and you're afraid to go to work because you're afraid you're going to die, and you're going to leave your wife alone and unable to take care of your kids, right?
Yeah.
People are freaking out over this stuff. And what I'm about to show the audience is going to be like a glass of red wine. I mean, you're going to be like, oh my God, this is unreal. Right?
It's presuming people enjoy red wine.
Assuming you like red wine.
Yeah.
If you like a glass of scotch or whatever, just a deep breath of oxygen. Okay, whatever's your poison. But what I have in my hand is the data, again, from the CDC. And an interesting development, I think, in the last 24 or 48 hours is the CDC will no longer be reporting on coronavirus. It's now being taken over by HUD. So they yanked it from the CDC. Yeah,
wow, Ben Carson,
so
is he going to be in charge?
I think if it's not HUD, it's what the hell was it? Who's the CDC report into? Whoever it is that they report into.
NIH.
No, same thing. And above them. So it's whoever it is that's the Secretary
Health and Human
of
Services.
That's what it is. HHS. That's what it is. So HHS is now taking over the reporting of the dead on coronavirus. However, the data is still up. So we went to take a look at the data. And unlike in the mainstream media, our hyperbole actually stands the test of the data, right? So when I tell you this is amazing, what you're about to see is stunning. All right. So this is the CDC's website. So there's been some questions. People keep asking, where do you get this? Where do you get that? When I go to the CDC's website, I see different numbers, right? So this is the CDC's webpage that shows the number of people that have died from coronavirus. So this is a specific site, okay? And this is just for coronavirus. And what they do in order to confuse everybody is they've got all these different columns here. So they've got deaths with pneumonia and COVID, and deaths with and without, and the deaths that had this but didn't have that. And you don't need any of that monkey business. The only column that matters is the first column on the left side. It's the only column that matters. All the other columns are superfluous. Right. And again, it's coming from a data guy. Right. So there's something called third normal form and how you develop tables. And the only column we need in this table is the first one. And the first column, well, the first column shows us the date. And then the next column shows us how many deaths involving COVID. And
wow, look at those
couple of
numbers.
observations.
0, 1, 0.
Well, look at the dates. That was
yes,
January,
that's from,
February.
Right. Oh, here it is, going up.
Okay, now, but it's important to correlate the numbers with the dates. Okay, now go back to the top. Go back up to the top. All right, so let's start at the beginning. All right, so the first, February, nobody, right? But then we had a couple of deaths. By mid-March, we were approaching 100 people, right? When the president declared a national emergency on Friday the 13th, and declared national emergency in 50 states, we had 204 people dead at that point. Mm-hmm. That was March 13th, right? So the end of March, 3,000 people were dead. Then we go into April. And in April, boom, 10,000, 9,900 people, right? 9,900. 16,000 people the next week. Almost 17,000 that next week, right? Then, whoa, what week do we have 17,000? What week do we have 17,000 people die?
April 18th.
What does that say? Okay. I want you now, so this is what data analysts do. Data analysts look at the numbers and say, show me some patterns here, right? So show me a pattern. So the first pattern I see is that from that day, April the 18th, which is how long ago now? April 18th is 3 months. Every single week, the number of people that have died from coronavirus has gone down every single week. Yeah. You heard it here first. Crowdsource the truth. You didn't hear it on ABC. You didn't hear it on NBC. You didn't hear it on CBS. You didn't hear it on CNN. Rachel Maddow doesn't have a clue.
You can almost see the curve. But there's the peak.
You
and then
can
it's going
see
down.
the curve. You don't have to be Neo, right? You don't have to be Neo to see the curve. You see April and you see 10,000, 16,000. Go up to April. Yeah. So in April, we go from 3,000 to 10,000 in a week, right? So 10,000 people die, right? Now, the next week, 16,000 people die that week. The next week, 17,000. But stop right there, April 18th. From that point, what's today's date? July
17th.
Okay. April, May, June, July. It's 3 months. For the past 3 months, fewer and fewer people have died every single week in the United States. That's a fact. That's not hyperbole.
But now let me pause you a second, John, because isn't this even more significant given that there's increase of cases and a decrease of deaths? So they're testing more people?
You can tell me there's 300 million cases in America. I don't care. What I care about, you could tell me everybody in America has athlete's foot.
The
Nobody's
number of fatal
dead.
outcomes
So who cares?
Is what we want.
Exactly. It's all I care about. So the issue is the news is reporting cases.
Yeah.
Because we're doing more testing, just as the president said. We're doing more testing. Of course, there's going to be more cases. The problem is no one takes the time to do the math. No one takes the time to do the work, to look at the numbers, to take 5 minutes to look at this and say, wait a second. We have been going down week in, week out for 3 months in a row, and excuse me, nobody's reporting this. Oh, forget this idiot. He's got
Well, I was going to say,
more
does
people
it look
dead in
like
New
the
York.
face of a mathematician to you?
No, he doesn't have a clue. In fact, I mean, when we're done, he's going to prison. I mean, he
I
has
hope
to.
so.
I mean, if this isn't homicide, I mean, at some point in the next couple of weeks, I'd love to see if we get Larry Klayman on and start talking about negligent homicide and is or is this not that?
He's
Because
been
this
busy, but
guy's
we
got
can get
close
him
to
on.
40,000 people dead.
Yeah.
I'd love to have him on and talk about, where's the culpability here?
Right.
If in fact there were things that were known that, there's got to be some big culpability. And I think there's some fraudulent activity. So again, let's go back to these numbers for a second. Let's go back to this because this is massive. I mean, this is such a tremendous break. You're not going to hear this on the mainstream media. You're only going to hear this on Crowdsource the Truth. You're probably going to hear this ripped off, though,
Yeah.
by a whole bunch of other alternative media sites because it's public information. It's at the CDC. Right. So we're breaking it here first. No one else is talking about it, but within 24 hours, here's what's going to happen. You're going to hear about this on Twitter. And you're going to hear about this on Twitter from people who watch this show but don't admit they watch this show. Do you know that we're like we've become like what Howard Stern was like in the late 80s in Wall Street. Everybody listened to Howard Stern on Wall Street in the 80s, and nobody admitted that they listened to Howard Stern. It was pretty funny. So that was when he was back on K-Rock or whatever.
NBC.
But when we look at these numbers, yeah, exactly. So when we look at these numbers, again, first observation, okay, since April, 3 months running, right, every single week, fewer and fewer people have died. Why did Rachel Maddow not figure this out? How come
She's too busy looking
Anderson
for Trump's
Cooper,
taxes still? Now, John, I'm sorry to interrupt,
how come
but
it?
we're getting real close to the end of our lead-in here, and people are going to be able to watch the follow-up where there's a ton more information coming when we start the sponsor-exclusive show in just a little more than 5 minutes on subscribestar.com and patreon.com/IamJohnCullen and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I also want to remind people that they can tune into John's YouTube channel by searching YouTube for John E. Hoover. Whenever we do these YouTube videos, they are simulcast live streaming on John's channel as well. And as he mentioned, he's got a lot of videos that he publishes throughout the week. More information on Fauci, following up on what we spoke about on Friday's sponsor-exclusive show and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's a good idea for people to head over to the John E. Hoover YouTube channel. He's just tickling 30,000 subscribers. So if we get 300 people over there this weekend, John can break the big 3-0. Anything quick, John, in the next 2 minutes before we make the transition to the sponsor-exclusive segment?
Indeed. So here's your final mega break. Right now, this past week, the most recent numbers that we have from the CDC are that 1,099 people have died from coronavirus the week of July 11th. 1,099 people. It's less than 1,100.
Yeah.
We haven't had that few. We haven't had a number die that's that low since March. Look at the bottom number, July 11th, 1,099 people. We haven't had a number that small since March. In fact, for the last 3 weeks, we haven't been in the 2,000s since March 21st, right? So we haven't had numbers like this since the third week in March. And yet, when you tune into the mainstream media, you'd think the sky is falling. And when I look at the numbers, I'm saying we are trending in the right direction. Next week, this should be less than 1,000 people dead from coronavirus. And they're talking about the military's moving in and 18 states are on red alert. So
Doesn't
when we
make
go to
sense.
our patron only hour, so the patron only hour, what we're going to talk about with our patrons is a new concept for the Johnny Hoover channel that's right now just conceptual. We're going to explore it just with our patrons and get their feedback and see what do they think of this idea. And if they like it, we'll explore it further. If they go, no, then we'll move on.
And it pertains to the title of today's show. Is John Cullen coming to America?
And I don't know if you've seen the film Coming to America with
I have.
The original with Eddie Murphy. I had the privilege of seeing Eddie Murphy live. Raw, the show he did in his purple jumpsuit.
Yeah.
So I was there at underneath Madison Square Garden. And I don't want to give too much away, but we're going to talk about this notion, this new concept for the Johnny Hoover channel when we go to the patron only hour, because I need feedback. I want to hear from our supporters, from our audience. What do they think of this? So we'll take a look at that when we go patron only.
We'll be there in just a couple minutes. I want to thank everybody for watching. So please make sure you join us on Patreon and Subscribe Star. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Thanks for watching, everybody.